The glass in Mira Callahan's hand slipped and shattered on the floor the moment the black cars pulled up outside the diner. She did not know why her fingers trembled. She only knew that something was wrong, and her body understood it before her mind did. The diner sat at the edge of town, where the paved road turned to gravel, and the streetlights grew fewer and fewer, until there were none at all. It was the kind of place people passed on their way to somewhere better. Mira had worked there for 2 years, wiping down tables, pouring coffee, and smiling at strangers who never asked her name. She liked it that way. Being invisible kept her safe. She bent down to sweep up the broken glass, her heart still pounding from nothing she could explain. Outside, car doors slammed shut, one after another, sharp and heavy, like gunshots in the quiet night. She looked up through the window and saw men stepping out of the vehicles, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a kind of discipline that did not belong in a town like this. Ellen, the diner's owner, a stout woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun, hurried out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "What in the world is going on out there?" she muttered, peering through the glass door. Mira did not answer. She could not. Her senses, the ones she had spent years learning to suppress, were screaming at her. She could smell it now, faint but unmistakable, carried on the night air. Blood. And beneath it, something else. Power. The kind of power that made the hair on her arms rise, and her wolf stir beneath her skin. A wolf she had not let out in over 3 years. The door swung open, and a man stumbled inside, one hand pressed against his side, dark liquid seeping between his fingers. He was young, maybe in his mid-20s, with sharp features, and eyes that burned gold for just a moment, before settling into a deep, tired brown. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and there was a gash along his jaw that had already begun to close, faster than any human wound ever could. Mira froze behind the counter. She knew what she was looking at. She had spent her whole life trying to forget what wolves looked like when they were wounded, and dangerous at the same time. "Sir, you're bleeding," Ellen said, rushing forward with the instinct of someone who had run a diner for 30 years, and had seen every kind of trouble walk through her door. Sit down right here." The young man waved her off with a tired hand, but he did sit, lowering himself into the nearest booth with a controlled kind of care, as if every movement cost him something. Behind him, 2 more men entered, scanning the room with quick, alert eyes, before taking positions near the door and the window. Guards, Mira realized. This was not just a young man. This was someone important. "Get me a towel," Ellen called toward the kitchen, but the cook had already stepped out, wide-eyed and unsure of what to do. Mira moved before she even decided to. Her feet carried her to the first aid kit under the counter, the one Ellen kept for kitchen accidents. Cut fingers and grease burns, nothing like the wound in front of her now. She approached the booth slowly, the towel and kit in her hands. Up close, she could see the wound more clearly. It cut deep along his ribs, angry and raw, but it was already knitting itself together at the edges, faster than it should, faster than anything human could manage. She had seen wounds like this heal before, a long time ago, in a life she tried very hard not to remember. "Let me look at that," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The young man's eyes lifted to hers, sharp and assessing, gold flickering at the edges again before fading. He studied her for a moment, longer than felt comfortable, as if he were trying to place a scent, a memory, something that did not quite fit. Then he nodded once, a small, tired gesture, and let her press the towel against his side. "You're not afraid," he said quietly, more of an observation than a question. "Should I be?" Mira asked, keeping her hands steady as she worked. "Most people would be by now." "I'm not most people," she said, and immediately regretted how much truth was hidden inside those 4 simple words. He studied her again, longer this time, and Mira felt the weight of his attention, like a physical thing pressing against her skin. She kept her eyes down, focused on the wound, refusing to give him any more reason to look at her the way he was looking at her now. "Name," he said. "Does it matter?" A faint, exhausted smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Everything matters tonight." She hesitated, then answered anyway. "Mira." "Cade," he said, offering nothing more. No last name, no explanation, though something in the way his guard straightened near the door told her his name carried far more weight than hers ever would. Ellen returned with warm water and clean cloths, fussing over the booth like a worried grandmother, completely unaware of what kind of creature sat bleeding in her diner. Mira worked quickly, cleaning the wound, pressing the towel firm against his side to slow the bleeding that had already begun to slow on its own. She had learned this kind of care long ago, in a home that no longer existed, from people who no longer existed either. Her hands remembered even when she tried to forget. "You've done this before," Cade said, watching her hands move with quiet precision. "Everyone knows first aid," she answered, deflecting. "Not like this." She said nothing, focusing instead on securing the cloth against his ribs. Outside, one of the guards spoke into a small device clipped to his collar, his voice low and clipped, words she could not quite catch, but understood the tone of well enough. Trouble was still out there. Whatever had happened to bring Cade through that door bleeding was not yet finished. "You should go to a hospital," she said. "This needs stitches." "No hospitals," Cade said, his voice suddenly harder, the exhaustion in it replaced by something colder, more commanding. "Not tonight." Mira did not ask why. She had learned long ago that some questions were better left unasked, especially around men who moved with guards and spoke of golden eyes hidden just beneath the surface. She simply nodded and continued her work, taping the cloth in place as best she could with what the kit provided. The bell above the door chimed again, and every guard in the room turned at once, weapons half drawn before they even registered who had entered. It was only Ellen's night cook, returning from his cigarette break, hands raised immediately at the sight of the tension in the room. He backed out just as quickly as he had come in, muttering an apology to no one in particular. Cade watched the exchange with tired eyes, then looked back at Mira, who had not moved from beside him, despite the sudden spike of danger in the room. "You didn't even flinch," he said. "I flinch at things that are worth flinching at," she said, before she could stop herself. Something shifted in his expression then, curiosity layered over exhaustion, as if she had said something far more interesting than she meant to. "And what is worth flinching at, Mira?" She met his eyes for the first time directly, gold flickering faintly at their edges even now, and felt a chill move down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. "Depends on the night," she said quietly. He studied her a moment longer, and Mira had the distinct feeling that he was seeing more of her than she wanted him to, peeling back layers she had spent years building carefully around herself. She stood, gathering the used cloths, needing distance, needing air, needing anything to break the strange pull she felt standing this close to him. "Thank you," Cade said, and though the words were simple, there was a weight behind them, as if gratitude did not come easily to a man like him. "Just doing my job," Mira replied, retreating behind the counter where she felt, foolishly, a little safer. Ellen bustled over with a fresh pot of coffee, chattering nervously about the late hour and the strange cars outside, filling the silence with the kind of harmless talk that came naturally to her. Cade answered her politely, vaguely, offering nothing real, his guards remaining alert near the windows, watching the dark road beyond the glass. Mira busied herself with the register, though her eyes kept drifting back toward the booth, toward the man who had walked in bleeding and dangerous, and had looked at her as though she were a puzzle he intended to solve. She told herself it did not matter who he was. She told herself she would forget his face by morning, the way she forgot every face that passed through this diner. But she did not forget the way his eyes had flickered gold, or the way her own wolf had stirred beneath her skin for the first time in years, restless and awake, as if it recognized something in him that Mira herself was not yet ready to understand. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows of the diner, carrying with it a scent that made Mira's stomach tighten with unease. It was not blood this time. It was something colder, sharper, moving closer through the dark. Whatever had chased Cade through that door was not finished with him yet, and somehow, without knowing why, Mira understood that she was no longer just a bystander in whatever came next. She looked toward the booth one last time, and found Cade already watching her, his expression unreadable, his eyes steady, despite the pain she knew he was hiding. Neither of them looked away. Somewhere outside, in the darkness beyond the parking lot, footsteps moved quietly through the gravel, patient and deliberate, closing in on the little diner and everyone inside it. The footsteps outside stopped just beyond the reach of the diner's light, and Mira felt every muscle in her body go tight with warning. She had spent years training herself to ignore the instincts of her wolf, but there was no ignoring this. Something was circling the building, patient and quiet, waiting for the right moment. Cade noticed the change in her posture immediately. "You feel it too," he said, not as a question. Mira did not answer, but her silence was answer enough. His guards had already moved, one near the door, one near the back exit by the kitchen, their bodies angled toward the darkness outside, as though they could see straight through the walls. "Ellen," Mira said quietly, "go to the back room and lock the door." Ellen, who had spent 30 years running this diner, without ever once being told to hide, looked at Mira with confusion, then at the tense guards near the windows, and something in her expression finally caught up to the danger in the room. She nodded once and disappeared into the kitchen without another word, her nervous chatter finally silenced. Cade rose from the booth despite the wound at his side, his movements slower than before but no less controlled. "You should go with her," he said to Mira. "And leave you standing here bleeding?" she replied, surprising herself with the sharpness in her own voice. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before one of his guards spoke, low and urgent. "Two on the east side, moving fast." The window nearest the door shattered inward, glass spraying across the floor, as a figure crashed through it, rolling once before rising into a low, ready stance. Mira's breath caught. The man's eyes glowed amber, sharp teeth briefly visible, before he forced his features back toward something more human. A rogue, feral and desperate, sent to finish what had started earlier that night. The guards moved instantly, one intercepting the attacker, before he could close the distance to Cade, the sound of the struggle brutal and fast, bodies colliding against the counter, dishes crashing to the floor. Mira stumbled back, pressing herself against the counter, her heart hammering as her wolf clawed at the inside of her chest. Desperate to be free, desperate to help. She held it back. She always held it back. The struggle ended almost as quickly as it began, the guards subduing the attacker with brutal efficiency, pinning him against the floor as the second guard rushed in to secure him. But Cade, still recovering from his earlier wound, had turned his attention toward the broken window, missing the second figure that slipped silently through the back door Ellen had left unlocked in her hurry. Mira saw him first, a tall man, calm and deliberate, stepping through the kitchen doorway, with a glint of metal in his hand, moving straight toward Cade's exposed back, while every guard in the room remained occupied with the first attacker. There was no time to shout a warning, no time to think. Mira's body moved before her mind could stop it, years of buried instinct finally breaking free all at once. She threw herself between Cade and the attacker, just as the object in his hand came down, a heavy glass decanter meant to strike bone and break it. The glass shattered across her back instead. Pain exploded through her shoulders, sharp and blinding, and she heard herself cry out, before her knees buckled beneath her. Cade spun instantly, catching her before she hit the floor, his eyes wide with something between shock and fury, as he understood exactly what had just happened. She had taken the blow meant for him. The guards reacted immediately, the second attacker subdued within seconds, but Cade barely registered any of it. His attention was entirely on Mira, who lay trembling in his arms, blood beginning to seep through the back of her shirt, where shards of glass had cut deep into her skin. "Why?" Cade said, his voice tight with disbelief. "Would you do that?" Mira tried to answer, but the pain made it difficult to form words. She had not decided to move. Her body had simply refused to let him be hurt, some instinct older and stronger than reason itself, taking over completely. "Someone needs to look at her wounds," one of the guards said urgently, already moving to help. "No hospitals," Cade said again, though this time the words came out strained, almost desperate, as he looked down at the woman bleeding in his arms because of him. Ellen burst out from the back room at the sound of chaos, her hands flying to her mouth, at the sight of broken glass and blood scattered across her diner floor. "Mira?" she gasped, rushing forward. "She'll be all right," Cade said firmly, though his eyes betrayed the uncertainty behind the statement. He looked to his guards. "Get the car ready. We're taking her with us." "Wait," Mira managed, pain sharpening her voice despite its weakness. "I don't need." "You do," Cade interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You took a wound meant for me. That is not a debt I can leave unpaid." Mira wanted to protest further, wanted to insist she could manage on her own, the way she always had, but the pain radiating through her back made speech difficult, and something in Cade's expression told her arguing would be pointless anyway. His guards moved with practiced efficiency, clearing a path through the diner, securing the two attackers, preparing the vehicles outside. "Ellen," Mira whispered, trying to reach for the older woman, even as Cade lifted her carefully from the floor. "Go," Ellen said, tears in her eyes despite her attempt at a brave smile. "Go and get yourself fixed up. I'll manage the diner. You just worry about healing." Mira wanted to argue, wanted to insist that her life belonged in this small, quiet diner, where nobody asked questions, and nobody looked at her the way Cade was looking at her now, with a mixture of gratitude and something far more complicated. But the pain in her back was spreading, and darkness was beginning to creep along the edges of her vision. "Stay with me," Cade said quietly, as he carried her toward the door, his voice softer now, meant only for her. "Whatever you did in there, whatever instinct made you move like that, I need you to stay conscious a little longer." "Why?" Mira murmured, struggling to keep her eyes open. "Do you care what happens to me? You don't even know me." Cade's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed straight ahead, as they moved through the shattered doorway, into the cool night air. "I don't know you," he admitted quietly. "But you just saved my life, without knowing anything about who I am, or what that means. That is not something I take lightly." The guards had already secured the two attackers into a separate vehicle, their expressions grim and controlled, despite the chaos of the night. Cade laid Mira gently across the back seat of the largest car, sliding in beside her despite his own unhealed wound, his hand pressing lightly against the fresh injury on her back, as if he could somehow hold the pain away through sheer will alone. "Where are we going?" Mira asked weakly, the world beginning to blur at the edges. "Somewhere safe," Cade answered. "Somewhere you can heal properly, without questions, without danger. And after that?" Cade was quiet for a long moment, watching her face, as the car pulled away from the diner, leaving behind shattered glass, and a night that had changed everything. "After that," he said finally, "I intend to find out exactly who you are, Mira, and why a woman who claims to be nothing more than a waitress just moved fast enough, and fearlessly enough, to save the life of an alpha's son." Mira's eyes widened at the words, understanding finally settling in, through the haze of pain. Alpha's son, the weight of what she had just done, and who she had done it for, crashed over her all at once. "You should have let it hit you," she whispered, only half aware of what she was saying as darkness finally began pulling her under. "No," Cade said quietly, his hand still resting protectively against her back, as the car sped through the dark toward the distant lights of the pack compound. "I really don't think I should have." The last thing Mira felt before consciousness slipped away entirely was the steady, careful pressure of his hand against her wound, and the strange, unfamiliar comfort of being protected by someone whose golden eyes she could not stop thinking about, even in the darkness pulling her under. Mira woke to unfamiliar softness beneath her, sunlight filtering through tall windows she did not recognize, and a dull, throbbing ache spreading across her back. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the diner, forgot the shattered glass, forgot everything except the strange, quiet comfort of the bed she lay in. Then memory returned all at once, sharp and sudden, the cars, the wound, the glass shattering across her back instead of striking Cade. She sat up too quickly, gasping as pain flared along her shoulders, the movement pulling at skin that had only partially healed. "Careful," a voice said from across the room, calm and steady. Cade sat in a chair near the window, dressed now in a clean shirt, his own wound clearly healed, though a faint pink line remained along his jaw where the gash had been the night before. He watched her with quiet intensity, as though he had been sitting there for some time, simply waiting for her to wake. "Where am I?" Mira asked, her voice rough with sleep and lingering pain. "The Ashford estate," Cade answered. "My family's compound." The name settled heavily over her. Ashford. She had heard whispers of that name before, in the careful, hushed conversations rogues sometimes shared when they thought no one else was listening. The Ashford pack ruled over one of the largest alliances in the region, and the Alpha King himself was said to be as fair as he was ruthless, depending on who you asked. "You're the Alpha's son," she said slowly, the pieces settling into place. "I am," Cade confirmed, watching her reaction carefully. Mira closed her eyes briefly, trying to steady the sudden rush of unease building in her chest. A rogue like her did not belong in a place like this. Rogues were tolerated at best, hunted at worst, and standing at the center of pack politics was the last place she had ever wanted to find herself. "I should go," she said, attempting to rise, despite the protest of her injured back. "You're still healing," Cade said, rising quickly to stop her before she could push herself too far. "The glass cut deep. You lost more blood than you realize." "I heal fast," she said, though even as she spoke the words, she winced at the pull of stitched skin along her shoulders. Cade studied her for a long moment. His eyes then moved briefly to the bandages wrapped around her back where a healer had clearly worked through the night. "Faster than a human," he observed quietly, "but not as fast as it should, for what you are." Mira's breath caught. She had been careful for so long, suppressing every instinct, every ability that might mark her as different from the humans she hid among. She had thought herself invisible, unremarkable, safe. But Cade had seen through that the moment she stepped toward him in the diner, fearless where any human would have trembled. "I don't know what you mean," she said carefully. "I think you do," Cade replied, though his tone held no accusation, only quiet curiosity. "You're a shifter, and judging by the scent that clung to you last night, one who has spent a very long time suppressing what she is." Mira said nothing, her jaw tightening as she stared at the unfamiliar room around her, searching for some way to escape a conversation she had spent years avoiding. "You don't have to tell me anything," Cade said gently, noticing her withdrawal. "But you should know that whatever you are, whatever you're hiding from, you saved my life last night. That means something in this house. It means you're under my protection now, whether you want it or not." "I didn't ask for your protection," Mira said, sharper than she intended. "No," Cade agreed. "You didn't. You simply acted, without thinking of yourself at all, to save a man you had known for less than an hour. That is not something easily repaid, Mira, and I don't intend to pretend otherwise." Before she could respond, the door to the room opened, and an older man entered, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair, and eyes that carried the unmistakable weight of authority. Mira did not need to be told who he was. The moment he stepped into the room, the air itself seemed to shift, heavier, more charged, as every instinct in her recognized the presence of an alpha, far more powerful than any she had encountered before. "So," the man said, his voice deep and measured, "this is the woman who threw herself in front of my son." "Father," Cade said, straightening slightly. Though his tone carried a note of caution, Mira had not heard from him before. King Ashford studied Mira with sharp, assessing eyes, the kind of gaze that seemed to strip away every defense she had ever built. "A rogue," he said finally, more observation than question. "Unclaimed, unranked, and yet fast enough and brave enough to intercept an attack meant for the heir of this pack." Mira forced herself to meet his eyes, despite every instinct urging her to look away. "I didn't think about rank," she said quietly. "I just didn't want him to get hurt." Something shifted behind King Ashford's expression, subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of respect layered beneath his obvious suspicion. "Instinct without hesitation," he murmured, almost to himself. "That is rarer than you might think, even among wolves born and raised within pack structure." "Father," Cade said again, more firmly this time, "she needs rest, not an interrogation." King Ashford's gaze shifted briefly to his son, something unreadable passing between them, before he nodded once and stepped back toward the door. "See that she heals properly," he said. "Cade, find out everything you can about where she comes from. A rogue with instincts like that did not simply appear out of nowhere." With that, he left as suddenly as he had entered, leaving the room feeling strangely emptier, despite his brief presence within it. Mira exhaled slowly, only now realizing how tightly she had been holding her breath the entire time. "He doesn't trust me," she said quietly. "He doesn't trust anyone easily," Cade replied. "It's part of what keeps this pack alive. But he respects strength, and what you did last night was strength, whether you realize it or not." Mira looked down at her hands, still faintly trembling from the tension of the encounter. "I don't want to be investigated," she admitted. "I don't want anyone digging into where I came from." "Why?" Cade asked gently, sitting back down across from her, his eyes steady and patient. "What are you hiding, Mira?" She hesitated, old memories rising unbidden, sharp and painful even after all these years. A burning house. Screams she could still hear in her quietest moments. A family she had lost long before she ever learned to control the wolf inside her. "Things I don't talk about," she said finally, her voice quieter than before. "Things that don't matter anymore." Cade watched her carefully, clearly sensing the depth of pain behind her words, though he did not push further. "All right," he said instead. "Then we won't talk about them yet. But you should know, Mira, that whatever happened in your past, it doesn't change what you did last night. It doesn't change what you are now, or what you mean to this pack." "And what is that?" she asked, genuinely uncertain of the answer. Cade studied her for a long moment, something warm and unguarded flickering behind his tired eyes. "Someone worth protecting," he said simply. "Whether you believe that about yourself or not." Mira looked away, unable to hold his gaze any longer, unsettled by the sincerity in his voice and the strange, unfamiliar comfort it stirred within her. She had spent years convincing herself she needed no one, that safety came only through invisibility and distance. But something about this place, and this man, was already beginning to unravel every careful wall she had built. Outside the window, the vast grounds of the Ashford estate stretched toward distant mountains, wolves moving freely between the trees, safe and strong under the protection of a pack far greater than anything Mira had ever known. For the first time in years, she wondered, quietly and cautiously, whether safety like that might actually be within her reach. But even as the thought formed, an old fear whispered beneath it, warning her that nothing this good ever lasted long for someone like her, and that the past she carried was far from finished chasing her down. 3 days passed before Mira could walk without wincing, and even then, the healer, a quiet woman named Dana, with steady hands and kind eyes, insisted she move slowly. The wounds along her back had closed faster than any human injury would have, but slower than a shifter's should, exactly as Cade had noticed. "You suppress your wolf too much," Dana said one morning, changing the bandages with practiced care. "It weakens the body's natural healing. If you let her out more often, even just to run, your wounds would close within a day." Mira said nothing, staring at the wall ahead of her, unwilling to explain why she had spent years keeping her wolf locked so tightly inside herself that even healing felt like a luxury she did not deserve. Dana did not push, simply finishing her work in silence before leaving the room, though her final glance carried a quiet sympathy that suggested she understood more than Mira wanted her to. Later that day, Cade found her sitting near the window, staring out at the wide grounds beyond the glass, wolves running freely between the trees in the distance. He had taken to visiting often, sometimes with questions, sometimes simply to sit in comfortable silence, though today he carried a folder tucked under one arm. "I need to ask you something," he said, settling into the chair across from her. Mira turned, immediately wary, at the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" Cade hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. "I had someone look into your background, not to violate your privacy," he added quickly, seeing the flash of anger cross her face. "But because whoever attacked me that night did not act alone. They were sent, Mira, by a rival alliance my family has been at odds with for years. And your name, or rather, the absence of any record of your name, raised questions." "I don't have papers," Mira said flatly. "I don't have a birth certificate, a family registry, anything. I've been off the grid since I was 16. "I know," Cade said quietly. "That's what concerns me. A shifter, with no record, no pack affiliation, and instincts sharp enough to intercept a professional attack, appearing at the exact diner I happened to stumble into while wounded. That is either an extraordinary coincidence, or it isn't a coincidence at all." Mira's stomach tightened. "You think I was sent there? To hurt you?" "No," Cade said firmly, meeting her eyes without hesitation. "I don't think that. If you wanted me dead, you had every opportunity that night, and instead, you took a wound meant for my back. I don't doubt your intentions, Mira. I doubt the circumstances surrounding you." She exhaled slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders, though unease still lingered beneath the surface. "What are you asking me exactly?" Cade opened the folder in his lap, revealing a handful of documents, old newspaper clippings, faded photographs of a burned building, surrounded by emergency vehicles. Mira's breath caught the moment she saw the images, old memories crashing over her, all at once, sharp and suffocating. 16 years ago, Cade said gently, watching her reaction carefully. A pack territory near the northern border was destroyed in a single night. An entire family, wiped out. Their compound burned to the ground. Officially, it was ruled an accident, a gas explosion. But the pattern of destruction, he tapped the photograph, does not match an accident. It matches a targeted attack. Mira's hands trembled as she stared at the image, the burned remains of a home she recognized instantly, despite the passage of years. She had spent 16 years trying to forget that night. The smoke, the screaming, the desperate scramble to escape flames that had consumed everything she once knew. That was my home, she whispered. Cade's expression softened immediately, though determination remained steady beneath his sympathy. I suspected as much, he admitted. The timeline matches, the location matches, your general origin, and the way you move, the discipline in your instincts, suggest training from a pack far more structured than a simple rogue upbringing. I don't remember much, Mira said quietly, old grief rising sharp and unwelcome. I was young. My mother pushed me out a window before the fire reached us. I ran, and I never stopped running. Do you know who did it? Cade asked carefully. Do you know why? Mira shook her head slowly. I've spent 16 years trying not to think about it. Trying to forget I ever had a family, a pack, a name that meant anything at all. Cade studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, a mixture of sympathy and growing suspicion he seemed reluctant to voice. Mira, he said finally, what was your family's name, before you became simply Mira Callahan? She hesitated, the name feeling foreign on her tongue after so many years of silence. Ravenswood, she said quietly. My family was the Ravenswood pack. Cade's expression shifted immediately, surprise and something else, something heavier, flickering behind his eyes. He closed the folder slowly, his jaw tightening as pieces clearly began falling into place within his mind. What? Mira asked, alarmed by his sudden stillness. What is it? The Ravenswood pack, Cade said slowly, was not destroyed by accident, Mira. And it was not destroyed by strangers either. The attack came from within the alliance itself, orchestrated by a rival family who saw the Ravenswood bloodline as a threat to their own claims of power. What kind of threat? Mira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cade met her eyes steadily. The Ravenswood bloodline carried an ancient lineage, tied to one of the founding packs of this entire region. If even one heir survived, that bloodline could challenge alliances that have stood for generations. Mira's breath caught painfully in her chest. You're saying someone destroyed my entire family, because of what my bloodline represented. I'm saying it's possible, Cade said carefully. And if that's true, then the attackers who came for me at the diner may not have been targeting me at all. They may have recognized you, Mira, recognized what your survival could mean for the same alliance that destroyed your family 16 years ago. The room felt suddenly smaller, the weight of the revelation pressing down on Mira with suffocating force. 16 years of hiding, of running, of convincing herself that anonymity kept her safe, and now she understood that her survival alone had painted a target on her back, long before she ever stepped foot inside that diner. I need to go, she said suddenly, rising despite the ache still lingering in her back. If they know I'm alive, if they're looking for me, I can't stay here. I can't put anyone else at risk. Mira, Cade said firmly, rising to stop her. Running is exactly what they want you to do. Alone, unprotected, you're vulnerable. Here, within the Ashford compound, you have protection stronger than anything you could find on your own. Protection that puts an entire pack at risk because of who I might be, she said, panic rising sharp and cold in her chest. Cade stepped closer, his voice softening even as his resolve remained firm. Mira, listen to me. Whatever bloodline you carry, whatever danger follows you, running alone into the night will only make you easier to find, easier to hurt. Staying here, under my protection, gives you a chance to actually fight back against whoever destroyed your family. Mira stared at him, torn between the instinct to flee that had kept her alive for 16 years, and the strange, unfamiliar pull toward trusting the man standing in front of her, offering protection she had never allowed herself to accept from anyone. Why, she asked quietly, would you risk your pack, your family, for someone you've known for only a few days? Cade's expression grew serious, steady and unwavering. Because you risked your life for me, without hesitation, Mira. And because whatever destroyed your family 16 years ago is connected to the same enemies threatening mine right now. Helping you isn't just about repaying a debt anymore. It's about survival. For both of us. Mira closed her eyes briefly. Old grief and new fear tangled together painfully inside her chest. For 16 years she had run from her past, convinced that forgetting it was the only way to survive. But standing here now, faced with the truth of what had really happened that night, she realized running had never actually protected her at all. It had only delayed the moment her past finally caught up. The council chamber of the Ashford estate was colder than Mira expected, its high stone walls lined with portraits of alphas long gone, their painted eyes seeming to follow her as she walked between rows of seated pack elders. King Ashford sat at the head of a long table, his expression unreadable, while Cade stood beside her, close enough that his presence felt like the only steady thing in the room. "You want us to extend protection," one of the elders said, an older woman with sharp eyes and a voice like cracking ice, "to a rogue with no pack, no record, and now, apparently, a target on her back, from the very alliance that has been sending assassins into our territory." "She is not simply a rogue," Cade said firmly. "She is the last surviving heir of the Ravenswood bloodline." Murmurs rippled across the table, some elders exchanging startled glances, others narrowing their eyes with open suspicion. Mira forced herself to stand straight, refusing to shrink beneath the weight of their scrutiny, despite every instinct urging her to disappear into the shadows the way she always had. "The Ravenswood pack was destroyed 16 years ago," another elder said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of old memory. "If she truly carries that bloodline, then her survival changes everything. It means the destruction of that pack was never resolved. It means the enemy responsible is still among us, still hiding, still waiting. Which is exactly why she needs protection," Cade said, "and why this pack needs to understand the full scope of the threat we're facing." King Ashford finally spoke, his deep voice cutting cleanly through the murmuring room. "Prove it," he said, his eyes fixed on Mira. "Prove your bloodline, and this council will consider your protection seriously. Until then, you remain simply a guest within these walls, nothing more." Mira swallowed hard, uncertain how exactly one proves something as intangible as ancestry. "I don't know how," she admitted honestly. "I was young when I lost my family. I don't have papers, records, anything that could prove who I really am." "Bloodlines leave marks beyond paper," the older elder said, studying Mira with narrowed, calculating eyes. "The Ravenswood line was known for a particular trait, one passed down through generations and impossible to fake. If you truly carry that blood, it will reveal itself the moment your wolf is set free without restraint." Mira's stomach twisted uncomfortably. She had spent 16 years suppressing her wolf so completely that even the thought of releasing it fully, without hesitation, without control, filled her with genuine fear. "I haven't shifted freely in years," she admitted quietly. "Then perhaps it's time you did," King Ashford said, his tone leaving little room for argument. Cade stepped closer to her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready." "If I don't," Mira whispered back, "they'll never trust me. And without their protection, I'm exposed to whoever is still hunting the Ravenswood bloodline." Cade studied her a moment longer, clearly torn, before finally nodding once in reluctant support. "Then we'll do it together," he said. "I'll be right beside you." The council led them out to the training grounds behind the estate, a wide, open field surrounded by tall trees, far from prying eyes beyond the pack's own territory. The elders gathered along the edge of the field, watching with sharp, critical eyes, as Mira stood alone in the center, her heart hammering with a fear she had not felt in years. "Let her go," the older elder instructed, "completely, no restraint." Mira closed her eyes, memories flooding back unbidden, the night of the fire, the desperate scramble through smoke and flame, the moment she had first learned to bury her wolf so deeply that even she sometimes forgot it existed at all. She had believed, for 16 years, that keeping her wolf hidden was the only way to survive. Letting it free now felt like standing at the edge of something dangerous and unknown. "You can do this," Cade said quietly from beside her, his voice steady and encouraging. "Whatever happens, I'm right here." Mira took a slow breath, closing her eyes, and for the first time in 16 years, she stopped fighting the instinct that had lived caged inside her for so long. She let go. The transformation came fast and overwhelming, her body shifting with a speed she had not experienced since childhood, fur the color of deep autumn leaves spreading across her frame, her senses exploding outward, with a clarity she had forgotten was even possible. She stood on 4 legs now, powerful and unrestrained, her wolf finally free after 16 long years of suppression. Gasps rippled through the gathered elders, and even King Ashford's controlled expression shifted into something close to astonishment. Mira's fur carried a distinct pattern along her shoulders, a marking unique to only one bloodline in the entire region, a mark the Ravenswood pack had carried for generations, unmistakable and undeniable. The Ravenswood mark, the older elder breathed, stepping closer despite herself. I have not seen that marking in 16 years. Cade knelt slowly beside Mira's wolf form, his expression filled with a mixture of awe and quiet relief. It's true, he said softly. You really are the last heir. Mira felt something shift within her wolf form, a strange, powerful energy stirring deep inside her chest, as though releasing her wolf after so many years had also released something else, something ancient and long dormant, waiting patiently beneath the surface for this exact moment. King Ashford rose from his seat, his expression grave despite the wonder still evident in his eyes. If the Ravenswood bloodline truly survives, he said, addressing the gathered elders, then this changes everything. It means the alliance responsible for its destruction has spent 16 years hiding a crime they believed successfully buried. And it means they will stop at nothing to ensure this bloodline disappears completely, permanently, this time. Then we protect her, Cade said firmly, rising to stand beside Mira's wolf form despite the tension still lingering across the training grounds. King Ashford studied his son for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, before finally nodding once in solemn agreement. The Ashford pack will extend full protection to the last heir of Ravenswood, he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the gathered elders. Let it be known throughout this alliance that whoever threatens her, threatens us. Mira shifted slowly back into her human form, exhaustion from the transformation settling heavily across her shoulders, though something else lingered beneath the tiredness, something like relief, like the beginning of belonging somewhere for the first time in 16 years. Cade wrapped a blanket around her shoulders gently, his eyes warm despite the seriousness still evident in the set of his jaw. You did it, he said quietly. I didn't do anything, Mira murmured, still catching her breath. I just stopped hiding. Sometimes, Cade said softly, that's the hardest thing of all. Around them, the elders began dispersing slowly, their expressions now carrying respect where suspicion had lived only moments before. But beneath the relief of acceptance, Mira felt a new weight settling over her shoulders, heavier than any physical burden. If the enemy responsible for destroying her family had spent 16 years hiding their crime, they would not simply allow her survival to remain a threat much longer. The revelation of her bloodline had bought her protection, but it had also declared war. News of the Ravenswood heir's survival spread through the pack alliance faster than Mira could have imagined, whispered between guards, murmured among elders, carried on the wind between territories that had spent 16 years believing that bloodline extinguished forever. Within days, the Ashford estate buzzed with attention that had nothing to do with ordinary pack politics. You've become something of a legend already, Cade said one evening, finding her on the balcony overlooking the training grounds where she had first revealed her wolf. Word travels fast in this world. I don't want to be a legend, Mira said quietly, watching the last light of sunset fade behind the distant mountains. I just want to understand why my family was destroyed, and who is responsible. Cade leaned against the railing beside her, his expression thoughtful. I've been looking into old records, trying to trace which alliance benefited most from the Ravenswood pack's destruction. It's not easy. Whoever orchestrated it covered their tracks carefully, and 16 years is a long time for evidence to disappear. But you found something, Mira said, reading the tension behind his careful words. Cade hesitated before nodding slowly. There's a family, the Draven Alliance, that expanded significantly into Ravenswood territory shortly after the fire. Officially, they claimed the land had been abandoned, unclaimed after the tragedy, but the timing has always seemed suspicious to those who paid close attention. Mira's stomach tightened at the name, though nothing about it felt familiar, no memory surfacing to confirm or deny the connection. You think the Draven Alliance ordered the attack on my family, I think it's worth investigating further, Cade said carefully. And given that the attackers who came for me at the diner were traced back to Draven territory, the connection seems more than coincidental. Before Mira could respond, a guard approached quickly from the doorway, urgency evident in his hurried steps. My lord, he said, addressing Cade directly. There's been an incident at the northern checkpoint. Draven representatives have arrived, requesting an audience with the Alpha King. Cade's expression sharpened immediately, exchanging a quick glance with Mira before turning back to the guard. What do they want? They claim to be here for diplomatic discussions, the guard said, though his tone suggested he doubted the sincerity of that claim, as much as Cade clearly did. But they've specifically requested the presence of the Ravenswood heir. Mira's breath caught, unease spreading cold through her chest. How could they possibly know already? News like this doesn't stay contained, Cade said grimly. Not within an alliance this large. Someone within our own territory likely passed word to Draven representatives the moment your bloodline was confirmed. A traitor, Mira said quietly. Or simply someone loyal to different interests, Cade replied. Either way, we need to be careful. If Draven representatives are already here, requesting your presence specifically, it means they're testing the waters, trying to gauge how much protection you actually have before deciding their next move. They made their way quickly to the main hall, where King Ashford already stood, facing a small group of unfamiliar wolves, their postures rigid with the careful formality of diplomats, who carried far more calculation than their polite expressions suggested. At their center stood a tall man with cold, calculating eyes, and a smile that did not reach them, introduced simply as Councilman Voss, representing the Draven Alliance. Ah, Voss said, the moment Mira entered the hall, his eyes settling on her with unnerving precision. The Ravenswood heir herself. What a pleasant surprise, to find her alive after all these years. State your business, King Ashford said, his voice cool and controlled, despite the obvious tension in the room. Simply diplomatic courtesy, Voss said smoothly. News of a surviving Ravenswood heir has understandably caused concern across several territories. My alliance merely wishes to ensure that whatever claims are being made regarding bloodline and lineage are properly verified, rather than exploited for political advantage. Her bloodline has already been confirmed, Cade said sharply, stepping forward beside Mira. By this council, in full view of respected elders. Voss's smile widened slightly, cold and calculating, confirmed by an alliance with clear motivation to gain influence through her claim, perhaps. Forgive my skepticism, but the Draven Alliance has learned to question convenient discoveries, especially ones that arrive during periods of political tension between our territories. Are you suggesting we fabricated her bloodline? King Ashford said, his voice dropping into something dangerously quiet. I suggest nothing, Voss replied smoothly. I merely raise questions that any careful observer might raise. After all, the Ravenswood pack was destroyed 16 years ago in what was officially ruled an accident. If this woman truly survived, why has she remained hidden for so long, only to resurface now, conveniently, within Ashford territory? Mira felt anger flare hot beneath her unease, the calculated insinuation in his words unmistakable, despite their polished delivery. I survived because I was a child, running from a fire that killed everyone I loved, she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor of emotion beneath it. I hid for 16 years, because I had no pack, no protection, and no reason to trust anyone claiming to represent justice for my family's death. Voss studied her for a long moment, something calculating shifting behind his cold eyes. A sympathetic story, he said finally. Though stories alone rarely satisfy questions of inheritance and territorial claim. Her bloodline mark was confirmed before this entire council, Cade said firmly. That is not something easily disputed. Marks can be replicated, Voss said smoothly, though the confidence in his voice seemed to waver slightly under the weight of Cade's certainty, especially by an alliance eager to expand its influence through a convenient new claim to ancient lineage. Enough, King Ashford said, his voice carrying the full weight of authority that silenced the room instantly. The Ravenswood heir's bloodline has been confirmed through methods this council trusts completely. Your alliance's skepticism, Councilman Voss, feels less like genuine concern and more like an attempt to destabilize a claim that threatens interests your territory has quietly benefited from for 16 years. Voss's expression flickered, just briefly, something colder and sharper passing behind his careful diplomatic mask, before smoothing over once again. A bold accusation, he said quietly. One I intend to investigate thoroughly, King Ashford replied, his tone leaving no room for further debate. This audience is concluded. You may return to your territory, Councilman Voss, and inform your alliance that the Ravenswood heir remains under full Ashford protection. Voss studied the room a moment longer, his calculating gaze settling one final time on Mira, with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Very well, he said finally, offering a shallow, insincere bow, though I suspect this matter is far from resolved. As the Draven representatives departed, tension lingered thick in the hall, long after their footsteps faded into silence. Cade turned to Mira immediately, concern evident across his features. Are you all right? He knows something, Mira said quietly, her mind racing. The way he looked at me, the way he questioned everything so precisely. That wasn't simple diplomatic skepticism. No, Cade agreed grimly. It wasn't. I think we just met the man responsible for destroying your family, or at least someone closely connected to whoever gave that order. Mira felt cold determination settling over her fear. 16 years of running finally giving way to something sharper, something resembling the courage to face what had haunted her for so long. Then we need proof, she said firmly. Real proof, strong enough to expose exactly what the Draven Alliance did to my family. Cade nodded slowly, his expression matching her resolve completely. Then that's exactly what we'll find, he said. Together. Outside the tall windows of the hall, storm clouds had begun gathering over the distant mountains, dark and heavy, mirroring the tension building steadily within the Alliance itself. Whatever peace had existed between Ashford and Draven territories for the past 16 years was clearly beginning to unravel, and Mira understood, with quiet certainty, that she now stood directly at the center of whatever storm was coming next. The days following Voss's visit passed in a blur of quiet preparation, Cade and Mira spending long hours combing through old records, searching for any thread that might connect the Draven Alliance directly to the destruction of the Ravenswood Pack. Between the research, something else had begun growing steadily between them, quiet and unspoken, though impossible for either to ignore completely. You've barely eaten today, Cade said one afternoon, finding Mira hunched over another stack of aging documents in the estate's private library. I keep thinking I'm close to something, she admitted, rubbing tired eyes. Some record, some detail, that connects everything together, but it's like chasing smoke. Cade set a plate of food gently beside her, his hand lingering briefly near hers before withdrawing. You'll find it, he said. But not if you exhaust yourself completely in the process. Mira looked up at him, something warm stirring in her chest at the quiet concern in his voice. Concern that had nothing to do with debts owed or political alliances. Why do you care so much? She asked softly. About a rogue you only met because I happened to be working the night you stumbled in bleeding. Cade sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. At first, it was simple gratitude, he admitted. You saved my life without hesitation. But somewhere along the way, Mira, it became something more than gratitude. Her breath caught slightly at the sincerity in his voice. Cade, I'm not asking for anything, he said gently, cutting off whatever hesitant response she had been forming. I only want you to know that whatever happens with Draven, with your bloodline, with all of this danger surrounding you, my concern for you isn't just about debt anymore. Mira felt warmth spreading through her chest, despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders, an unfamiliar, cautious hope stirring somewhere beneath 16 years of carefully guarded distance from anyone who might get close enough to hurt her, or be hurt because of her. I'm not used to this, she admitted quietly. People caring, without wanting something in return. I know, Cade said softly, but you deserve it anyway. Their quiet moment was interrupted by a soft knock at the library door, Dana the healer, stepping inside with a concerned expression. There's been movement near the eastern border, she said. Guards spotted unfamiliar wolves, scouting pack territory, close to nightfall. Cade rose immediately, his expression sharpening back into alert focus. Draven scouts? Likely, Dana confirmed, though nothing confrontational yet. Just observation. They're testing our defenses, Cade said grimly, glancing back at Mira. trying to determine exactly how prepared we are to protect you. Mira closed the old document in front of her carefully. Then we need to move faster, she said. Whatever proof exists of what happened 16 years ago, we need to find it before Draven decides diplomatic patience isn't worth maintaining any longer. Over the following days, tension within the estate grew steadily thicker, guards patrolling more frequently, elders holding hushed conversations in corners Mira was clearly not meant to overhear. Despite the growing danger, however, something steady and warm continued deepening between her and Cade. Stolen moments of quiet conversation, shared meals, careful glances that lingered a beat longer than necessary. I found something, Cade said one evening, rushing into the library where Mira had practically taken up permanent residence among the old records. An old shipment manifest, dated just days before the Ravenswood fire, weapons and equipment traced to Draven territory, delivered to a location less than 10 miles from your family's compound. Mira's heart raced as she examined the document he handed her, faded ink barely legible after so many years, but unmistakably real. This could be exactly what we need. It's not conclusive on its own, Cade cautioned, but combined with everything else, the territorial expansion, Voss's suspicious behavior, it builds a stronger case than we've had before. Before Mira could respond further, the sound of raised voices echoed from the hallway outside, followed quickly by hurried footsteps. A guard burst into the library, his expression tight with urgency. "My lord, we've captured someone attempting to infiltrate the estate's private archives. He's being questioned now." Cade and Mira exchanged a quick, tense glance before following the guard toward the estate's holding chambers. Inside, a young man sat restrained, his expression a mixture of fear and stubborn defiance, guards standing watchful around him. "Who sent you?" Cade demanded immediately. The young man remained silent, jaw clenched tightly despite the obvious fear behind his eyes. "He was caught attempting to access records related to the Ravenswood fire," the guard explained. "Specifically searching for documents connecting our territory to shipment records from 16 years ago." Mira's stomach twisted uneasily. "He was looking for exactly what we just found," she said quietly. Cade's expression darkened considerably as he studied the captured intruder, which means Draven knows we're close to finding proof, and they're trying to eliminate evidence before we can expose it publicly. "I'm not talking," the young man finally muttered, though the tremor in his voice suggested his defiance was built more on fear than genuine loyalty. "You don't have to talk," Cade said calmly. "Your presence here already confirms everything we suspected. Draven sent you specifically to destroy evidence connecting them to the Ravenswood destruction. That alone is enough to bring before this alliance's full council." The intruder's confident defiance faltered slightly, clearly realizing his capture had already revealed far more than his silence could hide. Guards led him away toward more secure holding, while Cade turned back toward Mira, his expression grim but resolute. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "If Draven is actively trying to destroy evidence, it means the proof we need is likely still out there somewhere, something significant enough that they're desperate to eliminate any trace of it." "Then we need to find it before they succeed," Mira said firmly, determination steadying her voice despite the fear still tightening her chest. Cade studied her for a long moment, something protective and fierce flickering behind his eyes. "We will," he said. "Together, whatever it takes." That night, as the estate settled into an uneasy quiet, Mira found herself standing once again on the balcony overlooking the training grounds, moonlight casting silver shadows across the wide open field where she had first revealed her true bloodline. Cade joined her quietly, standing close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "I used to think being alone kept me safe," Mira said softly, staring out at the moonlit grounds. "But standing here now, I realize how exhausting that kind of safety really was." "You're not alone anymore," Cade said quietly, his hand finding hers gently in the darkness. "Whatever comes next, Mira, you have people willing to stand beside you now." She turned to face him fully, moonlight illuminating the sincerity evident in his expression, and for the first time in 16 years, Mira allowed herself to believe, cautiously and completely, that trust might not always lead to destruction after all. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me as more than just a debt to repay." Cade's expression softened further, his hand tightening gently around hers. "You were never just a debt, Mira," he said quietly. Not from the very first moment you stepped toward me in that diner. Fearless and unwavering, without knowing anything about who I was. Beneath the moonlight, surrounded by danger neither of them could fully predict, something steady and unshakable continued growing quietly between them. A bond neither Draven's threats nor 16 years of buried grief could easily unravel. But somewhere beyond the safety of the Ashford estate, in the shadows of Draven territory, plans were already forming, plans far more dangerous than a single captured intruder searching hidden archives, plans that would soon test exactly how strong the bond between Mira and Cade truly was. The captured intruder's silence did not last long once King Ashford himself entered the holding chambers, his presence alone enough to break through the young man's remaining defiance. Within hours, the full scope of Draven's plan began unraveling before the gathered council. "He confirms it," King Ashford said grimly, addressing Cade and Mira in his private chambers later that evening. Councilman Voss ordered him specifically to locate and destroy any remaining shipment records connecting Draven territory to the Ravenswood fire. But he revealed something else as well, something far more concerning. "What is it?" Cade asked, tension evident in his voice. King Ashford's expression darkened further. "Draven's alliance is not simply attempting to eliminate evidence anymore. They're planning a direct assault against Ravenswood's surviving heir before this council can gather enough proof to expose their crime publicly." Mira's blood ran cold. "They're going to try again," she said quietly. "Finish what they started 16 years ago." "It appears so," King Ashford confirmed grimly. "The intruder mentioned a planned strike within days, timed specifically to prevent any possibility of your bloodline claim gaining further support among neighboring territories." Cade's jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "Then we need to move faster than they expect," he said. "If we can expose the proof of their crime before their planned attack, it removes their motivation entirely. A public execution attempt against a confirmed heir, especially amid growing suspicion of guilt, would destroy whatever remains of their political standing. A dangerous gamble," King Ashford said carefully, "but perhaps our best option, given the timeline we're now facing." Over the following 2 days, the Ashford estate transformed into a hive of urgent activity. Guards reinforcing perimeter defenses, elders drafting formal accusations to present before the wider regional council, while Cade and Mira worked tirelessly to compile every piece of evidence they had gathered into an undeniable case against the Draven alliance. "The shipment manifest alone might not be enough," Cade said late one night, reviewing their collected documents with visible exhaustion. "We need something that directly ties Voss himself, or his immediate family, to ordering the attack." Mira rubbed her tired eyes, flipping through another stack of old records salvaged from the estate's private archives. "What about witnesses?" she asked. "Surely someone from that time is still alive, someone who might have seen or heard something." Cade considered this for a long moment. "There's an old healer," he said slowly, memory clearly surfacing, "named Corwin. He served several territories during that period, including briefly assisting Ravenswood before the fire. If anyone might remember details from that time, it would be him." "Is he still alive?" Mira asked hopefully. "Living quietly in a small settlement near the southern border, last I heard," Cade confirmed. "It's worth the risk to seek him out, especially given our limited timeline." The following morning, Cade and Mira set out with a small, trusted group of guards, traveling quickly toward the distant settlement where the elderly healer reportedly resided. The journey passed with tense alertness, every sound in the surrounding forest setting nerves on edge, aware that Draven's scouts could be watching their movements at any moment. They found Corwin exactly where Cade's information suggested, a frail, elderly man living quietly among simple wooden cottages, his sharp eyes widening with unmistakable recognition the moment Mira stepped into view. "Ravenswood," he breathed, studying her intently. "I never thought I would see that face again." "You knew my family," Mira said softly, cautious hope rising in her chest. "I served your mother personally, during her final months of pregnancy," Corwin said, his voice trembling slightly with old memory. "You have her eyes, child. I would recognize them anywhere." Cade stepped forward gently. "We need your help," he explained. "We believe the Draven Alliance orchestrated the destruction of the Ravenswood Pack 16 years ago, and we need proof strong enough to expose their crime before this council." Corwin's expression grew somber, old grief evident behind his tired eyes. I've carried this secret for 16 years, he admitted quietly. Fear kept me silent for far too long. But if Ravenswood's heir truly survived, then perhaps it's time the truth finally came to light. He led them inside his modest cottage, retrieving a small, weathered box from beneath worn floorboards, his hands trembling slightly, as he opened it, to reveal old letters and documents, carefully preserved, despite the passage of years. I overheard a conversation, Corwin explained, between Voss's father and another Draven official, discussing plans to eliminate the Ravenswood bloodline before it could challenge their territorial claims. I documented what I heard, hoping someday I might find the courage to reveal it. Mira's hands trembled as she carefully examined the fragile documents, detailed accounts written in careful, precise handwriting, describing exactly the conversation Corwin had overheard all those years ago. This is exactly what we need, she whispered. There's more, Corwin said quietly, retrieving a final item from the box, a small, tarnished pendant, bearing the unmistakable Ravenswood crest. Your mother gave me this, the night before the fire, asking me to keep it safe, promising she would return for it. She never did. Mira accepted the pendant with trembling hands, overwhelming emotion rising sharply in her chest as she studied the delicate crest, a tangible piece of the family she had lost so long ago. Thank you, she whispered, tears blurring her vision, for keeping this safe, for all these years. I only wish I had found the courage sooner, Corwin said softly, regret evident in his weathered features. Perhaps then, more of your family might have survived. Cade placed a comforting hand gently on the old healer's shoulder. You've given us exactly what we need now, he said. Justice for the Ravenswood pack finally has a chance. As they prepared to depart, urgency settling heavily over their small group once again, Corwin caught Mira's hand gently, his eyes serious. Be careful, child, he warned. Draven will not surrender easily, especially now that their crime stands exposed. Whatever confrontation comes next, it will be fierce. Mira nodded solemnly, tucking the fragile pendant safely against her chest, alongside the newly gathered proof of her family's destruction. I'm ready, she said quietly, though uncertainty lingered beneath her resolve. Whatever happens next, I'm ready to face it. The journey back toward the Ashford estate passed with heightened tension, every shadow within the surrounding forest suddenly feeling far more threatening than before. Cade rode close beside Mira, his expression alert and protective, clearly aware that possessing such damning evidence against Draven made their small group an even greater target now than ever before. We're close, he said quietly, as the familiar estate finally came into view beyond the trees. Once this evidence reaches the regional council, Draven's crime will be impossible to hide any longer. Mira nodded, gripping the fragile pendant tightly beneath her cloak, 16 years of buried grief and unanswered questions finally converging toward the possibility of long-overdue justice. But even as relief washed cautiously through her, an uneasy certainty lingered beneath it, warning her that Draven would not accept exposure quietly. Whatever attack they had been planning against her was likely closer now than ever, and the confrontation awaiting them at the Ashford estate would prove far more dangerous than anything Mira had faced since the night flames first consumed everything she had ever known. The moment their small group crossed back into Ashford territory, Mira sensed something had shifted, the air heavier, guards moving with sharper urgency along the perimeter walls. Cade noticed it too, his expression tightening with immediate concern as they approached the main estate. Something's wrong, he said quietly, urging his horse faster. They arrived to find King Ashford already waiting at the entrance, his expression grave despite his controlled composure. Draven forces have gathered near the northern border, he said, without preamble. Far more than simple scouts this time. It appears they've decided to act before we can present our evidence to the regional council. Mira's stomach tightened with cold dread. They're attacking now. We believe so, King Ashford confirmed. Likely within the next day, judging by the movement patterns our scouts have reported. Cade's jaw clenched with fierce determination. Then we present the evidence immediately, he said. Before their assault, not after. If the regional council receives proof of Draven's crime before their attack begins, it exposes their true intentions publicly, regardless of what violence follows. A wise strategy, King Ashford agreed. Though a race against time, we may not win. That evening, Urgent messages were dispatched to every allied territory within the regional council, accompanied by copies of Corwin's testimony and the recovered shipment documents. Mira sat quietly in the estate's private chambers, the Ravenswood pendant resting gently in her palm, memories of her mother's face flickering faintly at the edges of memory she had spent 16 years trying desperately to forget. Cade found her there, his expression softening the moment he saw her quiet vulnerability. "You don't have to face tomorrow alone," he said gently, sitting beside her. "I know," Mira said softly, "but it still feels like my fight more than anyone else's." "It's ours now," Cade said firmly, his hand finding hers gently. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Mira, you won't be facing it without me beside you." She turned to face him fully, moonlight casting soft shadows across his features, and something deep and unshakable settled quietly between them, stronger than fear, stronger than 16 years of carefully guarded distance. "Cade," she whispered, "if something happens tomorrow, if I don't—" "Don't," Cade interrupted gently, his voice steady despite the emotion evident beneath it. "We're going to face tomorrow together, and we're going to win. I refuse to consider anything else." Mira leaned into him then, resting her head against his shoulder, drawing quiet strength from his steady presence beside her. For the first time since the fire had taken everything from her, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond simple survival, a future built on trust, partnership, and the kind of belonging she had convinced herself she would never deserve. The following morning arrived with heavy tension blanketing the entire estate, guards positioned along every wall, warriors gathering within the training grounds where Mira had first revealed her bloodline weeks before. King Ashford addressed the assembled pack with steady authority, rallying their resolve despite the danger clearly approaching from Draven territory. Word arrived swiftly that the regional council had received their evidence, urgent discussions already underway among allied territories regarding the damning proof against Draven's alliance. But before any formal judgment could be rendered, scouts reported movement along the northern border, Draven forces advancing directly toward Ashford territory with clear, aggressive intent. "They're not waiting for the council's decision," Cade said grimly, standing beside Mira as they watched preparations intensify across the training grounds. "They intend to eliminate you before judgment can be passed against them." "Then we stop them here," Mira said, her voice steady, despite the fear tightening her chest. Cade studied her closely, something protective and fierce flickering behind his eyes. "There's something else we could try," he said carefully. "Something that would strengthen your position significantly, though it's a decision only you can make." "What is it?" Mira asked. "A formal claiming," Cade said quietly. "If I claim you as my mate, before the entire pack, it binds you permanently, under Ashford protection, strengthening your position beyond simple guest status. It would also awaken dormant abilities within your bloodline, abilities tied specifically to mate bonds among ancient lineages like yours." Mira's breath caught, understanding fully the weight behind his words. "Cade, that's not a decision to make out of desperation, or convenience." "It's not desperation," Cade said firmly, his eyes meeting hers with unmistakable sincerity. "Mira, I've wanted this since the moment you stepped fearlessly toward me in that diner, though I didn't fully understand it myself until recently. Whatever happens today, I want you claimed not because it strengthens your defenses, but because I love you, completely and without hesitation." Tears blurred Mira's vision, 16 years of guarded distance finally giving way completely beneath the sincerity of his words. "I love you too," she whispered, "though I never expected to say those words to anyone, not after everything I lost." Cade's expression softened with quiet relief, his hand rising gently to cup her face. "Then let's face today together, fully and completely," he said. "As mates, bonded permanently, stronger than anything Draven can throw against us." The claiming ceremony took place swiftly within the estate's private courtyard, witnessed only by King Ashford and a handful of trusted elders, given the urgency of the approaching threat. As Cade completed the ancient ritual, sealing their bond permanently, Mira felt an overwhelming surge of power awaken deep within her chest, ancient and long dormant, the true strength of her Ravenswood bloodline finally fully unlocked. "It's happening," King Ashford said, watching in quiet astonishment, as Mira's eyes flickered briefly, with a golden light, unlike anything he had witnessed before. The old bloodline power, fully awakened through the mate bond. Mira gasped softly, as new strength flooded through her veins, senses sharper, instincts clearer, an ancient power settling comfortably within her for the first time since childhood. "I feel it," she whispered, awe evident in her voice. "I feel everything now." Cade studied her with fierce pride and quiet relief. "Then we're ready," he said firmly. "Whatever Draven brings against us today, we face it together, fully bonded, fully strengthened." As if summoned by his words, a guard rushed urgently into the courtyard. "My lord," he said breathlessly, "Draven forces have reached the northern perimeter. The attack is beginning." Cade took Mira's hand firmly, determination steady in his eyes. "Then let's finish what should have ended 16 years ago," he said. Together, newly bonded and fully empowered, they moved swiftly toward the gathering battle, the weight of 16 years finally converging toward a single, decisive confrontation that would determine not only Mira's fate, but the fate of two alliances, locked in a conflict born from betrayal, greed, and a crime, buried far too long beneath comfortable lies. Smoke curled along the northern perimeter, as Draven forces pressed against Ashford's defenses, the clash of powerful wolves echoing across the wide, open fields surrounding the estate. Cade fought fiercely near the front lines, his movements sharp and controlled, while Mira, newly empowered by her awakened bloodline, moved with a strength and precision she had never known herself capable of. Councilman Voss appeared at the edge of the battlefield, his calm diplomatic mask entirely abandoned, replaced now by cold, calculating fury. "You should have stayed hidden," he called out toward Mira, stepping closer despite the chaos surrounding them. 16 years of peace, undone because a frightened child refused to stay forgotten. "Peace built on murder isn't peace at all," Mira replied, her voice steady despite the battle raging around them. "It's just silence, waiting to be broken." Voss's expression twisted with barely restrained anger. "Your family threatened everything my alliance built," he spat. "Their bloodline alone could have challenged territorial claims we spent generations securing. Destroying them wasn't murder, it was survival." "It was cowardice," Mira said fiercely, dressed up as necessity. Voss lunged forward suddenly, his own wolf breaking free in a burst of aggressive speed, but Mira met his attack head-on, her newly awakened strength allowing her to match his ferocity without hesitation. They clashed fiercely, powerful wolves colliding amid the chaos of battle, while around them, Ashford and Draven forces continued their desperate struggle. Cade fought his way steadily closer, determined to reach Mira's side, though Draven warriors pressed against him relentlessly, clearly under orders to keep the mates separated during the confrontation. Despite the overwhelming chaos, Mira held her ground against Voss, her movements sharp, precise, and increasingly confident, as her bloodline's true strength continued surging through her. "You can't win this," Voss snarled, circling her cautiously now, clearly surprised by the ferocity of her resistance. "I already have," Mira replied steadily. "The regional council already has proof of your crime. Whatever happens here today, your alliance's guilt is already exposed. This battle won't save you, Voss. It only confirms exactly what kind of man you truly are." Voss's confidence wavered visibly, understanding finally settling that even victory on this battlefield would not erase the evidence already circulating among allied territories. Desperation crept into his movements, reckless and increasingly unstable, as he launched another aggressive attack toward Mira. This time, Cade arrived just in time, intercepting Voss's attack with fierce precision, forcing the Draven councilman backward with powerful, controlled strikes. Together, mates fully bonded and fighting in perfect unison, Cade and Mira pressed their advantage, driving Voss steadily backward until he stumbled, exhausted and finally cornered. "Yield," Cade commanded, standing protectively beside Mira, both of them breathing heavily but resolute. "Your forces are already retreating. Your alliance's guilt is already exposed. There's nothing left to fight for." Voss looked around desperately, realizing finally that his remaining warriors had indeed begun retreating, unwilling to continue a battle already lost both militarily and politically. Slowly, reluctantly, he shifted back into human form, defeat evident in his exhausted, defeated posture. "This isn't over," he muttered darkly, though the hollow threat carried little weight given his obvious defeat. "For you, perhaps not," Mira said steadily. "But for my family, for the truth that's finally been exposed after 16 years, this is exactly the ending it deserves." Ashford warriors quickly secured Voss and the remaining Draven forces, the battle finally drawing to a decisive close as the sun began rising steadily over the smoke-filled battlefield. Cade turned immediately toward Mira, concern evident despite the fierce pride still lingering in his exhausted expression. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, checking carefully for injuries. "I'm more than all right," Mira said, quiet wonder evident in her voice. "For the first time in 16 years, I finally feel like myself completely. Strong, whole, unafraid." Cade smiled gently, pulling her carefully into a warm embrace, despite the exhaustion evident in both their postures. "You should feel that way," he said softly. "You faced your past today, fully and fearlessly, and you won." In the weeks that followed, the Regional Council formally condemned the Draven Alliance for their role in the Ravenswood Pact's destruction, stripping significant territorial claims and political influence as consequence for their 16-year-old crime. Voss himself faced formal exile, his cold ambition finally costing him everything he had once tried so desperately to protect. Mira, meanwhile, found herself embraced fully within the Ashford Pack, her bloodline finally honored rather than hidden, her strength recognized rather than feared. The quiet diner where she had once hidden herself away, invisible and unremarkable, remained a cherished memory rather than a permanent refuge, though she visited occasionally, bringing Cade along to meet Ellen, who fussed over them both with tearful, joyful pride. "You always did seem like you were meant for something bigger," Ellen told her warmly during one such visit, watching Mira and Cade together with quiet affection. "I just never imagined it would be this big." Mira laughed softly, glancing toward Cade with warmth evident in her eyes. "Neither did I," she admitted, "but I wouldn't change a single moment of how it happened." Standing together outside the small, familiar diner where their story had first begun, Mira allowed herself, finally and completely, to imagine a future built not on fear or survival alone, but on genuine belonging, partnership, and love. 16 years of hiding had ended not with further running, but with the courage to stand fully in her own truth, fearless and unashamed. And as Cade took her hand gently, leading her back toward the life they had built together, Mira understood clearly that the waitress who had once thrown herself fearlessly between danger and a stranger had become something far greater than she ever imagined possible. Not merely a survivor, but the rightful heir of a legacy finally restored, standing proudly beside the man who had chosen her, completely and without hesitation, from the very first night fate had brought them together.